So welcome everybody, welcome to today's flow session with the Value Stream Management Consortium. I'm Helen Beal, I head up the VSMC as we like to call it for short. And today I'm super excited to have my very great friend and one of our board directors at the VSMC who's been involved with us from the very start, Steve Pereira, here to talk about his brand new book. So Steve, I've introed you a little bit, but is there anything else you'd like the audience to know about you?
I guess just that I would love to hear from anyone who's got the book, got feedback about the book, who might be interested in putting the book to work. Like, actually, my most favorite thing is hearing about people who are doing this, whether or not they've got the book or not. Like, I really am a big fan of this idea of mapping with people, and so I love to hear about folks who are doing that. And so, any cases, feel free to drop in the chat or reach out to me at any time and let me know, because I'd love to share notes and ideas with anyone who's doing this type of work.
Vincent says his copy's still on his way. Vincent, pop in the chat where you are, because I'm sure Steve will be
Yeah,
delighted
some
to
folks have
learn.
had trouble with deliveries, which I'm not very pleased about, especially from Amazon, who we expect to be great with delivery. But I think most of them have been very good.
So it's coming via Amazon.de to Belgium. So I think maybe it's
Yeah,
some of the print on demand stuff as well, which is so ecologically great these days, but it can cause a little bit of a delay. Jan
right.
said hello from Norway, and Mike has the book and is using the formats at a new consult engagement manufacturing. So you definitely need to hook up with Mike.
Awesome. Awesome.
Let's talk some more about the book itself then. So, flow engineering is a fairly new concept that you're kind of building a knowledge center around with this book. Is that a fair thing to say? Or do you think it's something that's deep in our conscience and we just need to kind of surface it and really pull it out and do something with it?
That's a great question. I think that, these there's nothing in the book that people haven't done before. I think the novelty and the motivation for the book was bringing these things together that people are maybe doing in isolated spurts, or they've tried one of the mapping practices in the past and kind of fizzled out, or didn't really get translated into something that they could act on. And we wanted to kind of bring it together into a start to finish program that you could sort of follow to go from, we have a bunch of chaos, all the way to, everybody knows what they're doing and we all know how our efforts fit together and we're all headed in the same direction. So it was really just an effort to pull together and build upon a lot of stuff that's already been defined elsewhere into something that people can easily follow, but then also easily talk about. The label flow engineering is kind of catchy and appealing to folks who are familiar with things like platform engineering or some of the more technical aspects of tech work, but kind of applied specifically to this challenge of collaboration and workflow, and how you get to all those other things that we want. Right, we want site reliability engineering to be successful, we want platform engineering to be successful. Very few people talk about how you might go about that with a single set of practices that you could apply in all these different contexts.
And I think I'm going to come back to that because I've got another diagram for the book later on, or a diagram for the book that I think really brings all of that together. But I really felt that. I felt flow engineering, like you said, it's got a novelty and newness about it, but actually it is about bringing these practices together and using them in combination in a way that hasn't really been done before, with those goals as described here, to move from friction to flow. Writing a book is by no means a small exercise. It takes many, many hours to produce something that just ends up being like something you can hand to somebody. And we're never sure of the future of all of that work as well. What motivated you and Andrew to actually invest your time and share your knowledge and your expertise in this way?
I mean, it kind of dovetails on the previous answer, that a lot of this material has been around for, in some cases, decades, right? and yet, doesn't often get used or, put into regular practice in organizations, and doesn't necessarily get discussed outside of these little specialized pockets. So part of the motivation for the book, and the reason that Andrew approached me and said that, have you ever thought about writing a book about this, was, he kind of asked for a recommendation on what books would you recommend for value stream mapping in the context of DevOps and knowledge work and building software and engineering. And, there's of course Karen's wonderful book. And then there's a lot more kind of esoteric knowledge that's kind of distributed all over the place. And Karen's book, Karen comes from manufacturing and very much, the physical world. And at the time we were during COVID doing a remote conference, and we were doing these mapping exercises on a mural board as part of the session on value stream mapping. And so it was like, that doesn't exist. Nobody's really talking about that. And this paradigm where we're now all distributed and hybrid. And so it just seemed like an opportunity to bring all these things together and make them kind of accessible under these new circumstances, right? The circumstances of distributed work, of rising complexity, huge scale, distributed and diverse perspectives, having to collaborate on really complicated build and develop and deploy problems. So, it felt like a good time to address that. And I knew that what I'd been doing for the past 5-6 years at that point was working really well. And I tested it in all these different environments, really small companies, project-based companies who are trying to get to product-based operating models, and large enterprises and companies where they had digital aspects and physical aspects, and they had to deal with really complicated regulations. And I was like, I've tested this enough, and I would like to be talking about it more often with people who can bring in their experiences and contribute to this. So, I came up with the hashtag of flow engineering a long time ago in 2019. And it was just like, if you're interested in this, if you're working in this space, like, use this hashtag, and so we can connect with you, we can find each other and talk about this stuff. And that, of course, has limited exposure. A book is a much easier way to collect all those ideas together and get them in front of many more people. And hopefully this kind of serves as an invitation for other folks to pick this up and start contributing to this practice of engineering flow. And that would satisfy, my success criteria for doing this. That's exactly what I'm hoping for, is that more people can join this type of effort with some confidence that there's proof behind it, there's principles, there's practices, there's history, there are people who are willing to share their knowledge and their experience, and hopefully that makes it a little bit less scary and less risky, and helps people like me 10 years ago feel like they're not the only person trying to do this kind of stuff.
It's a great way to gather people with the common interests, isn't it? And actually, IT Revolution, your publishers, have a really strong track record of doing it with other titles, of course, starting with Gene Kim's original title, The Phoenix Project, and the DevOps community rallying around that. And then I'm thinking of things like team topologies and From Project to Product, and Better Sooner, Faster, Safer, the John Smart title. So yeah, this is definitely going to work. There was so much in the book that I wanted to quote, but I was very aware that we only have 30 minutes to share today. So I picked this one out, which I just really liked. And it reminded me of the Spotify engineering videos that we used to use a lot in the early days of DevOps, and how they used to talk about an organizational chart just being an illusion as well. And I just loved this, this idea that it's the simplest view of the internal power structures and an explicit representation of power hierarchies. And the only obvious goal from looking at the org chart is to try and ascend it. And I love this because I feel like in value stream management as a whole, and flow engineering being part of that, is that we are just trying to tackle these hierarchical models and explain to people that actually the way an organization operates is quite different. Is that kind of what you were trying to get across here? And what else would you say about organizational design when it comes to flow engineering?
Yeah, there's so much to say about it, and it's really consequential, this view of the organization that we have. And there's no arguing that ascending the org chart really gives you the power to affect change in your organization. But the way that that typically comes about is by a kind of brute force attack rather than engineering the conditions of success, right? Or enabling um, flow and contribution across the organization. I think that we live in a world of spectrums where many things are true at the same time, and the way that they kind of behave or the context that they exist in is really consequential. So you can get a lot done when you just go grab people, put them in a room and say, like, don't come out until this is finished. But we also know that that's not sustainable, and it's not our best work, right? We don't get the best outcomes that way. We may get things done, but we can almost guarantee that there's going to be unintended consequences of that. And we know that it's not scalable or sustainable. So I think it's very important to recognize that how the best organizations work, they prioritize customer outcomes, they prioritize the flow of work over role power and authority, and the way that the org chart would have you believe the organization is actually comprised, right? If we think about, an organization, for example, like Amazon, is very important what your role is, and power has a very significant role to play in that type of organization. But there's nobody more powerful than the customer, and there's nobody more powerful than a single threaded owner of a value stream in that organization, right? If you're the person who says, I'm going to ensure that this outcome is achieved, you're the boss of that effort. And that's in addition to the fact that they have an org chart and they have rules and they have power. And I think that's really important. So it's kind of a yes and. It's not an advocation for getting rid of org charts, but in adopting a new way of looking at the organization in addition to the org chart.
I really enjoyed some of the crossover as well between the kind of the conversations we've been having at Value Stream Management Consortium and things like Flowtopia. And I enjoyed seeing some of the references to Beku and things that we've learned from the teams. So I wondered how this shifts. And actually, I think the question I really want to ask is about the relationship between flow engineering and value stream management. So at the Value Stream Management Consortium, we've got our implementation roadmap. We have mapping, value stream mapping specifically as one step in the value stream management implementation roadmap. So I wanted to get your view on how all of this fits together and where people can start and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that is really interesting, and I think unexamined territory so far. There's certainly a difference between standing up a capability and getting it started in your organization, and what I see as a kind of a continuous practice with flow engineering, right? And somewhat decoupled from individual efforts. So, if you're adopting or implementing value stream management, value stream mapping is a critical component of that, setting a clear vision, which I would love to see people use outcome mapping for. These are all really important pieces of getting started with value stream mapping. And one of the things that we really, or sorry, management. And one of the things that we really found about flow engineering is that it it kind of effectively serves as an on-ramp for a lot of these things that we want to do, whether that's, you know, try out the Spotify model, for instance, or some specific methodology, or implement value stream management and test that out in different contexts. You know, there's a specific operating model that you could adopt in an enabling team to leverage team topologies, where that enabling team is kind of helping out with efforts like value stream management, adoption, or implementation, and either supporting that directly or indirectly. But I see primarily the difference between standing something up and then maintaining, improving, and operating. And flow engineering, I think, really fits well in the case where you want to optimize flow, improve performance, get out of a bottleneck issue, resolve challenges with dependencies in workflows that are already operating to some extent.
I think one of the things that I found really interesting about this particular diagram is that when I was talking a lot about DevOps, when I first started speaking, I would talk about the super pattern, the DevOps super pattern. For me, it came about because I was talking about this harmonious polygamous marriage, which is a phrase I stole from my friend Jane Grohl from the DevOps Institute. And she coined it as something that DevOps was made up of lean and agile and ITSM. And I used to talk about that. And then one of my customers, Lego, and I used to talk about the relationship between holacracy and DevOps. And we were talking, I did both those talks at an event, I think, in Munich. And John, John's second name is a very famous John in the DevOps world. His name's just John Willis. John Willis was there, and he said, "Oh, I talk about this three-legged stool," and he was talking about learning organizations and safety organization, and I think the theory of constraints was the third part of his stool. So we invented this kind of super pattern, and we used to talk about standing on the shoulders of giants. And you and I, when we put together the materials for the VSM Foundation course for the VSMC, we did a similar thing and looked at the history and had the overlap and the progression between these different practices. So again, what we're seeing here is that there are all these different solution approaches. So I think for the purpose of the audience, the question becomes, there's so many things you can learn. So how do you choose them? How do you connect them? And then how do you kind of consume and digest them into something useful that you can apply in your real world, whether that's your clients or your own organization? What's your advice? Because you've obviously been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And for me, I feel like I've taken a scenic route to learning all of this, which has its benefits and flaws. I would say on the benefit side, you know, learning through experience is very lean in one context, in that you don't really learn things that you aren't putting to practice and don't apply to real problems that help it stick, help your learning actually stick. But you know, learning things the hard way is also wasteful at the same time, right? You usually learning through failure and creating waste and doing things that don't ultimately matter, and eventually stumbling upon something that works. For me, I always struggled with agile in that it seemed very micro optimized, you know, and very difficult to scale. And so for that, I really had to lean on I had to lean on lean to really start to understand the system to a greater extent. And to me, lean was what made things like systems thinking and complexity actually manageable and understandable, because they lean is really kind of goal oriented and directionally oriented, and those constraints of setting a target and understanding that, you know, first focus on value and then understand how value actually is created. Like that to me made sense. And I could use that as a context to try to understand other things and sort of like give me first principles approach to, okay, well, what does that mean in the context of systems? What does that mean in the context of complexity or agile or DevOps or automation? And so that was a huge unlock for me. And that's why our principles in the book are just lean principles. You know, we kind of add context and dig into them pretty deeply and connect them with different aspects of flow engineering. But we didn't try to reinvent the wheel by coming up with our own principles, because I really think that lean principles are incredibly powerful and underappreciated and under leveraged. So um, that was really helpful to me. But models like this are also very helpful to me, you know, when because I'm a visual person. If I'm trying to sort out a bunch of information in my head, I want to get it out onto a canvas and move it around and start to think, okay, what are the relations between these things, and how would I rank them, how would I put them into different contexts, how do I interconnect them, and where do they differ? And so to me, this was helpful to understand, you know, what are we really trying to do? We we know that being on either end of the spectrum is problematic for various reasons. What you really want is something in the middle. And how do you get there? And how do you kind of borrow from the best of the top and the best of the bottom and get the best of everything? And that has to be an adaptive, generative process that hopefully benefits from some degree of prescription, meaning it's somewhat easy to follow.
So I wanted to ask you about these three gaps as well. So can you just talk us through what we're seeing here? Like, do people have all of these gaps and they have to try and solve them all at once, or is this like a diagnostic tool?
Hmm. Well, I think that uh, I I think we always have these gaps to some extent, and they're impossible to exterminate. But I think we rarely consciously address them or factor them into our operating conditions. So to me, an alignment gap is we have multiple different participants in any effort, right? We're never working on our own, truly. And so that means that people have different perspectives, different senses of value, different directions that they're aiming, different goals, incentives. And so, you know, for us to really work together well, we have to narrow the gap between all these divergent perspectives and incentives and everything. So that's creating alignment is very critical. It's very difficult when you can't see what's going on in people's heads, but what they're working on, you know, their metrics and where their metrics are trending, the kind of data and context that they're using for making decisions. And so visibility is a major problem, especially at scale. At large scale, you have more alignment that needs to happen, more visibility that needs to happen, or the consequences of not having these things are even greater. And then, you know, let's say in the context of something like value stream management or adopting some kind of framework or change effort, you know, going from 0 to 1 is difficult. It's very difficult to kind of start and get everybody moving in the right direction. And, you know, I think the value stream management implementation roadmap is an excellent example of bridging an on-ramp gap, right, towards value stream management. But that, you know, that gap exists everywhere for every type of effort that we're trying to undertake, like whether it's migrating to a cloud or adopting a new capability like artificial intelligence. And so, you know, we saw this opportunity to apply mapping to those types of challenges and get people from, we're all on different pages and no one's speaking the same language and we're, you know, we don't really know what's going on, to, okay, we're making progress and we're headed in the right direction together.
So I can't believe time is ticking on. We've got like 4 minutes of my scheduled time left. I loved this here because what I loved most about this was just the comment, we see the data revealing a constraint that affects us both. It was just such a simple way to explain, as you titled this, the power of the map. It's suddenly the business and the technical people. And, we could talk for hours on the problems that we have with people separating those two parts of an organization. But we don't have hours. So I'm kind of skipping to the end slightly. This is flow engineering at its core, right? This is the full set of flow engineering exercises. So your elevator pitch for this before we wind up, what do you want to say about this? What do you want people to take away from today?
I would say that the main takeaway from this is something that I and many people now have applied successfully in a number of different, some surprisingly different contexts, and it is intentionally, start to finish, like start from zero and get going. But you could substitute any number of practices for the purposes here. Like what really matters here is the purposes. And that's something that I don't know really obviously comes out for people. But, you know, we have to be able to get on the same page and understand where we're headed or what we're trying to do. And, we have to understand what's holding us back. We have to understand what is behind those things that are holding us back. We have to be able to talk very specifically and constructively about what should the future look like. And then we've got to be able to break up all the ideas and experiments that we come out with and get them prioritized and owned by people with some kind of measurements of success so that we can go off and get working without stepping on each other's toes or running in circles and all the other things that happen when we just try to dive right in. So it's really just a suggestion of, this is a set of practices that you can follow. You're welcome to swap in whatever you like. You can skip all of it if you already know exactly what to do and everyone's on the same page. Then save it for a rainy day. But I think that that's really what I would hope people come away with, is that this is a suggested program that has been proven to work, and I'm really interested to hear how people put it to work in their context and what they come up with when they learn by doing this.
Perfect. We've had loads of chat in the chat, and actually a couple of questions that are very powerful, pertinent questions, but quite common ones. One of which is about the application of AI in this environment, and the other is about how to get funding and senior management buy-in. Both very lengthy questions. So I'm going to say that Steve and I will take some time out and put some words down in a blog or a couple of blog posts on those topics, because I think they're both so relevant. And we will come back to you on that. If you're not already a Value Stream Management Consortium member, we would love you to join us, of course. You get lots of extra content from us. You get access to the VSM Foundation course that Steve and I wrote and recorded for all of our members, and all sorts of other things, and lots of exclusive networking opportunities. There is a $50 discount code for you there, and you head over to that page there. And if you haven't already bought the book, please do go ahead and buy it now. There is the link. I think Steve's going to throw the link in there as well if Patrice hasn't already. I saw Patrice put an article link in there as well, which is great. And it's been marvelous to see everybody. Steve, I'll share you the chat record after the event, because
Awesome.
the people are giving you feedback, very positive, all of it on your book. It's been a pleasure, as always, chatting with you. I'm loving the book. Haven't quite finished it yet, but I'm working my way through it and savouring lots of it. My favourite bit today was I was reading about actually, whilst you started, like me, practicing these exercises in the kind of physical world, with the pandemic having to go virtual, actually there are great advantages on doing things virtually. Around being able to simultaneously do things and being able to do them much more quickly and not wait for rooms and projectors and things to be available, and being able to retain and edit the assets that you've created and artifacts that you create. Anyway, we are over time. So thank you so much, Steve. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you for letting me ramble on so much. I
I
hope we
loved it.
got to everything everybody wanted, but I'm excited to talk about the questions in the chat. That was great.
Yeah, we'll follow up on all of that. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And I will see you somewhere sometime soon, I am sure. And goodbye for now.
Thanks, folks.
Bye, everyone.